Why did 3 helicopters descend from the Montana sky that morning, onto a campus that had never known violence? Blackwood didn't move when the textbook slipped from her hands. She only watched, breath caught in her chest, as the black shapes grew larger against the blue horizon. At 19, she should have been thinking about midterms, not extraction protocols. She should have been planning her weekend, not scanning her dorm room for exits. And yet her body reacted before her mind did, instincts long buried flickering awake. She stepped back from the window, positioning herself behind the frame, one eye on the quad below. 3 touched down with surgical precision, their rotors shredding the morning calm. Leaves scattered across the manicured grass, and students rushed outside with phones raised, laughing, shouting, trying to make sense of the spectacle. But knew she didn't need uniforms or insignia. The movements were enough. The patterns, the formation, Delta Force. Her throat tightened. For 3 months she had lived like a ghost among the living. She had worn the skin of a freshman, blending into cafeteria lines, crowded lecture halls, and noisy dorm hallways. She had learned to laugh at jokes she didn't find funny, to doodle sketches in the margins of notebooks, to nod when professors called her name. Her roommate thought she was shy but sweet. Her classmates thought she was quiet, maybe a little lonely. None of them saw the way her eyes traced every exit, or how she kept her bed angled toward the door, muscles taut even in sleep. None of them had seen the scars. And none of them knew she had once been called something else. Sergeant Blackwood. Now, as Colonel's boots hit the grass, felt her chest constrict. She knew that gait, that posture, that relentless voice carried through the loudspeakers. She had seen him in places no student should have to imagine. Places where orders were measured in lives lost and silence screamed louder than explosions. He wasn't here for some ceremonial display. He was here for her. The announcement cut through the crisp air. Attention! We are looking for Blackwood. This is an official military matter. Miss Blackwood is requested to report to the quad immediately. Her name cracked the fragile shell of her new life. Students gasped. Laughter turned to whispers. A few shouted to each other, "Who's Blackwood?" The irony was cruel. For 3 months she had mastered the art of invisibility, and now in one sentence she was the center of everything. Her phone buzzed. "OMG, are you seeing this? Military helicopters are looking for someone named Blackwood. Do you know who that is?" Sank against the wall, her sweatshirt hanging loose on her frame, her heart pounding so loud she was sure the soldiers in the hallway could hear it. The world she had built here, fragile, ordinary, beautiful in its simplicity, was dissolving in minutes. And yet part of her felt relief. She was tired of running, tired of pretending, tired of carrying secrets that gnawed at her whenever she tried to smile, but relief didn't erase dread. Because the moment she opened that door, she wouldn't just be a freshman anymore. She would be Sergeant Blackwood again. And Sergeant Blackwood had bled, killed, and survived things no teenager should carry inside. The knock came. Sharp, deliberate, a pattern she recognized. 3 raps, pause, 2 more, military code. Her pulse slowed. Training took over. She stood, smoothed her sweatshirt, checked the mirror. A freshman's face looked back, rounder, softer, carefully painted to seem innocent. A mask, nothing more. She opened the door. 2 soldiers stood in full combat gear. Sergeant Cooper, professional calm. Beside him, Lieutenant Hayes, a woman with steel in her eyes, a presence that commanded without words. Their weapons were holstered but knew how quickly hands could move. "Miss Blackwood," Cooper said. His tone was firm but respectful. "Colonel has requested your immediate presence on the quad. This is not a request." She nodded. "I understand." The hallway was alive with whispers, doors cracked open, phones raised, students recording. By nightfall, she knew her face would be everywhere. She kept her eyes forward, walking between her escorts, every muscle aware of the eyes crawling across her back. Finn, a boy from her philosophy class, called from his doorway, his voice trembling with confusion. "What's going on? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she lied. But as they pushed through the lobby and into the October sunlight, knew the truth. Nothing would ever be fine again. The quad had transformed. Soldiers stood at crisp angles. Helicopters loomed like predators. Students pressed against the perimeter, buzzing with speculation. At the center, Colonel waited. He looked older than she remembered. More lines carved into his face, more weight in his stance. When his eyes found hers, the crowd melted away. Relief, disappointment, command, all tangled in one expression. He said, loud enough for the entire campus to hear. "Colonel," she replied, her voice slipping into the disciplined cadence she had once used every day. It was instinct, and the crowd noticed. A murmur spread, recognition, unease. "You've been difficult to find," he continued. "Hiding in plain sight as a freshman, creative. Not many would think to look for Sergeant Blackwood in an art history class." The title dropped like a stone. "Sergeant," the students gasped. She met his gaze. "I'm not Sergeant Blackwood anymore. I'm just a student." His voice sharpened. "Are you?" "Because the sergeant I knew would never let civilians cluster this close to military aircraft. She wouldn't have ignored tactical disadvantages, and she certainly wouldn't have waited 7 minutes to answer her door." Her chest tightened. He was right. She had noticed the vulnerabilities, every threat, and forced herself to ignore them, pretending, playing a role, but roles dissolve under pressure. "Why are you here?" she asked, though the answer already twisted in her gut. "You know why." His tone carried the weight of memory, of missions, of nights soaked in blood and silence. 3 months ago you disappeared from a military hospital in Germany. No discharge papers, no forwarding address. You vanished. But now the situation has changed. "What situation?" "Syria," he said. The word alone made her stomach clench. "The mission you left behind has been reactivated. We need you back." The noise of the crowd blurred, but she barely heard it. Syria. The word was a wound. The mission that had nearly destroyed her. The scars still burned. She had run from that place, from that self, believing she could bury it under textbooks and dorm chatter. But here it was, clawing back. "I'm not that person anymore," she whispered. "We'll see." Before she could answer, glass shattered. Screams cut the air. Students scattered as shards rained down from the Defense Study Center. But didn't flinch. She had already heard it, the whistle before impact. Not an accident, not random, calculated. "Sniper," she said calmly. "Second floor, east corner, trajectory from 45 degrees. Her eyes swept, calculating lines, angles, cover. "Clock tower, third level, north-facing window." The colonel's head snapped toward her, surprise, then respect. "How certain?" "Because that's where I'd be." Her voice was steady, cold, the voice of Sergeant Blackwood, not the freshman. And in that moment, the mask she had worn for months cracked apart. The students saw it. The professors saw it. Standing pale in the crowd saw it. And they realized the truth. The quiet freshman in the dorm had been someone else all along. Not just someone, a weapon. What happens when the lies you told to protect yourself are suddenly dragged into daylight? The quad was still buzzing with panic, but inside's chest everything had gone silent. Not calm, not relief, just silence, the kind that came before a storm. Students still scattered from the broken glass, faculty tried to herd them away, and soldiers scanned rooftops with weapons drawn. But all heard was the faint crack in her roommate's voice. His face in the crowd was pale, stricken, eyes wide with the betrayal of someone who thought they knew you. Her voice cut across the chaos, trembling, desperate. "Who are you really?" Froze. For 3 months, that was the one question she prayed would never be asked. Now it was out there in front of hundreds. And there was no cover story rehearsed enough, no mask strong enough to hide behind. Colonel didn't wait for her answer. He gave quick orders, his tone sharp, rehearsed from decades of crisis. Students, perimeter secured, helicopters on standby. But even as his voice carried across the quad, every eye stayed fixed on. The freshman was gone. Sergeant Blackwood stood in her place. Minutes later, she was ushered into the administration building. The polished oak table in the conference room reflected too much light, every surface sterile and unwelcoming. Dean Reed sat at its head, flanked by campus security and colonel, was placed across from them, still in her sweatshirt, looking like any 19-year-old. But the air in the room said otherwise. The dean's voice trembled as she shuffled papers. Your admission file raises questions. Transcripts from Portland, but the school has no record of you. Records that don't add up. Sat still, hands folded. She knew the mask was gone. Leaned forward, voice steady but edged. That's because she didn't graduate in the traditional sense. She enlisted at 17. Basic training, intelligence schooling, overseas deployment. Chief Cross of Campus Security stared at her, incredulous. She's 19. When exactly was she serving overseas? Classified, answered, his jaw tight. What I can tell you is that she served with distinction, commendations, lives saved. Stomach churned. Commendations, distinction. Words that sounded noble to civilians. To her they were ghosts, each medal a weight around her neck. Dean Reed's face was pale, her voice almost breaking. So the girl sitting in my classroom, the girl in my dorms, was a soldier, a weapon. His eyes stayed on her hands. She wanted to tell them she was both, that she had been trying so hard to prove she was something other than the sum of missions and orders, but before she could speak, continued. She vanished from a hospital in Germany. No authorization, no contact. She disappeared. The word echoed. Disappeared, it was true. She had run not from them, from herself. I needed time, said, finally lifting her head. Her voice was quiet but carried in the silence. Time to see if I could be more than what I was trained to be. Time to figure out if I could be normal. Normal. The word felt fragile in her mouth, almost childish compared to the weight of classified files and chemical weapons briefings. The dean studied her with conflicted eyes. And did you? For a moment thought of the mornings with coffee too bitter, laughter too loud, long nights sketching in the margins of notebooks, the small, quiet joys of being unseen. I thought so, she admitted, for a while. His phone buzzed. His eyes scanned the message and the air in the room shifted. Military urgency replaced academic confusion. He stood, his voice suddenly sharp. We don't have time for this. The network has resurfaced. Chemical weapons, civilian targets in Europe, 72 hours. Stomach dropped. She knew those words, not in theory, not in classrooms, in reality. She had smelled the acrid sting of those weapons, seen the aftermath no textbook could capture. Why me, she asked, though the answer burned in her chest. Because you know them, said. You've been inside, you understand how they think. Her lungs constricted. Inside, the undercover months, the lies, the friendships she had forged and betrayed, the trust she had weaponized, and the faces, their faces, were burned into her memory. No, she said, standing abruptly. I can't, I won't. The colonel's eyes hardened. You don't have the luxury of choice. Her voice snapped, sharper than she intended. Yes, I do. My name is Blackwood. I'm a freshman art major. I study for midterms. I make bad coffee. That's who I am now. But even as the words left her lips, she heard how hollow they sounded. She wasn't just the student. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. The colonel didn't argue. He simply pulled up a photo on his tablet and slid it across the table. A crowded train station in Paris. Among the blur of commuters, one face froze her blood. Someone she had once sat across from, laughed with, broken bread beside while pretending to be one of them. A man who would kill without hesitation and who believed she was already dead. Her hands trembled. If he was in Paris, it meant the network was moving. Faster, smarter, deadlier. How many people? She whispered. 50,000, said, if they succeed. Silence. 50,000. The number was too large to imagine, but's mind didn't see numbers. She saw faces, families, children, ordinary people who would never know her name but whose survival might hinge on whether she said yes. Her phone buzzed. "Hey, are you okay? Want to grab dinner later?" The words were so normal it hurt. Dinner, homework, roommate chatter, the life she wanted, the life she had tried to protect by running. And yet 50,000. Her chest ached with the weight of the choice. In the lobby, voices rose. Students had gathered, fueled by news alerts and rumors spreading faster than truth. Phones lifted like weapons, recording, demanding answers. Was there, her face blotchy from tears. When stepped into the room, every conversation stopped. The quiet was louder than any scream. "Is it true," his voice shook, "that you're some kind of spy?" His throat tightened, every eye locked on her. Her answer would define her in ways no assignment or mission ever had. "It's complicated," she said. "Complicated how? Complicated like you lied about everything. Like your name, your past, your entire life." Words were sharp, but behind them was hurt, the kind that cuts deeper than bullets. His voice dropped. "I never lied about being your friend. That part was real." His tears fell freely. How am I supposed to know what was real? How? The crowd pressed in, phones capturing every word. Professor stepped forward, face pale with betrayal. "Sergeant Blackwood," she said, her voice icy. "I've been teaching military studies for years. You sat in my class. You pretended to struggle with basic concepts. You lied to me, to all of us." His chest burned. "I was trying to protect myself." "Protect yourself, or protect us from the truth of who you are." The professor's voice trembled, not just with anger, but with grief. The grief of a teacher who realized the student she thought she had nurtured had been wearing a mask. The lobby fell still, looked at every face turned toward her. "I was trained to be a weapon," she said quietly. The words fell heavy, impossible to soften. "I infiltrated, gathered intelligence, eliminated threats. I killed people who planned to kill others, and I was very good at it." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the ones recording lowered their phones. "I came here," continued, her voice steady now, "to see if I could be someone else, to build instead of destroy, to be a friend, a student, a person. But maybe I was selfish. Because while I was trying to be normal, 50,000 people's lives hung in the balance." Her confession landed like a blow. Students who had worried about exams suddenly saw the weight she carried. Professors who had lectured about war realized they had been teaching theory to someone who had lived it. His whisper broke the silence. 50,000 people. Nodded once. Chemical weapons in Europe unless someone stops it. The room was deathly quiet. And then slowly voices rose, not accusatory but awed, frightened, overwhelmed. And knew, whatever choice she made, her life it was gone. What do you do when 50,000 lives depend on the part of yourself you've tried to bury? The words hung over like a 50,000, too large to imagine but not too large to feel. She could still smell the aftermath of chemicals in the air from her last mission, still hear the broken gasps of survivors, still see the eyes of children whose world had collapsed in silence. Those memories were the chains she had been trying to escape at, and yet they were the very reason Colonel had come. Back in the basement library, the study tables had been cleared, replaced with glowing screens and military hardware. The hum of classified servers, the clipped voices of operatives. This was no longer a university. It was a war room, and somehow she was back inside it. Sat before the monitors, her sweatshirt feeling like a costume now, her fingers trembling as they danced over keys with muscle memory she wished she had lost. Intelligence files glowed across multiple screens. Satellite images, intercepted communications, dossiers that felt too familiar. "They've evolved," she whispered, tracing the lines of names and faces across the display. "New leadership, new assets, smarter, faster, they learned." Stood behind her, arms folded, eyes on her profile. That's why we need you. No one else knows their patterns like you." She shook her head, her throat tight. "No, you don't need me. You have teams of analysts. You have people who haven't been broken by this. People who can still sleep without waking up screaming." His reply was calm, unyielding. "But you've been inside. They trusted you. They believed you were one of them. You understand how they adapt when plans collapse. You can predict them in ways data alone never will." Her hands hovered above the keyboard, trembling. She didn't want to predict. She didn't want to understand. Understanding meant remembering faces, faces she had betrayed to protect strangers who would never know her name. A new image flashed onto the screen. Al, the man she thought dead, the one who had nearly ended her life. "He knows I'm alive," said, her voice flat, almost numb. "We believe so," answered. She exhaled, long and unsteady. If knew, then her time had been a fragile illusion from the start. He wouldn't stop. He wouldn't forget. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Dinner later. The message was so normal it broke her. Tears blurred her vision. How could she explain to that dinner plans no longer belonged to her, that the girl who had studied beside her had never really existed? She typed one word back, maybe. But she knew the answer. The intelligence briefing unfolded in cold efficiency. Routes, targets, timelines. Cities lit up on the screens: Paris, London, Berlin. Casualty projections scrolling across the bottom like stock tickers. The numbers were sterile but saw only people. Mothers clutching children in train stations. Commuters crammed shoulder to shoulder. Lives about to be snuffed out in silence and gas. Her chest constricted. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice cracking despite herself. "Didn't hesitate. I want you to help stop it, that's all." She turned to him then, anger flashing through the exhaustion. "That's all. You're asking me to go back into the fire I barely crawled out of. You're asking me to put back on the mask that nearly killed me. You're asking me to give up the only chance I've had to be human again." He didn't flinch. "Yes, because you're the only one who can." The silence that followed pressed in like a weight. Stared at the screens, at the faces of men she once knew, and realized the cruel truth. Her normal life had been built on borrowed time. And now the debt had come due. She whispered, "If I do this, what happens to me, to my life here, to the person I've been trying to be?" His voice softened, just enough to reveal the man beneath the uniform. "I don't know, but I know what happens to 50,000 people if you don't." The hum of machines filled the room. Outside, students walked past, laughing, planning their evenings, blissfully unaware of the war raging beneath their feet. Closed her eyes. She thought of her father, of the photograph she kept hidden in her textbook. "Your courage will light the way home." Maybe home wasn't a place you ran to. Maybe it was something you carried, even into the darkness. Her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "What do you need me to do?" The news broke within hours. National outlets carried shaky footage of helicopters on the quad, plastered with headlines about secret operatives and military cover-ups. Blackwood, freshman art major, was now a national story. When she returned to Maple Ridge Hall to pack, the lobby was swarming with whispers. Phones rose like a sea of lenses, every angle captured, every glance dissected. Was waiting, arms folded, her eyes raw. "Is it true," she asked quietly, as if the cameras weren't already recording every second, "that you're going back?" Hesitated. The word yes felt like a death sentence. The word no felt like betrayal. She answered with silence. Lips trembled. "I don't even know who you are." Wanted to tell her, to spill every truth she had locked away, but what good would it do? The truth didn't heal, it only wounded deeper. Instead, she said the only thing she could. "I never lied about being your friend." His eyes filled, but she nodded once, just barely. It was enough, and not enough. The flight to Washington was 4 hours, but it felt like moving backward through time. Every mile stripped away the layers she had built at. The sweatshirt replaced by tactical gear. the textbooks exchanged for encrypted files. She could almost feel the mask sliding back onto her face. Across the narrow cabin, Colonel studied her. He had seen soldiers break before. He knew the haunted look in her eyes. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly, his voice nearly lost beneath the drone of the engines. "I want that on record. No one is forcing you." She stared at the glowing screen in her lap, at dossiers filled with faces she had once pretended to love. 50,000 people, she whispered. That's force enough. Or is it guilt? His question landed sharp, unflinching. Because guilt makes bad operatives. Guilt makes you reckless. It makes you take risks you can't come back from. She didn't answer, because he was right. She wasn't doing this for medals or duty. She was doing it because she couldn't bear to live with the weight of letting others die when she might have stopped it. Her secure phone buzzed, an encrypted message. Sender KJ. Yep. Whatever you're about to do, remember, some of us think you're worth coming home to. The words blurred in her vision. She pressed the phone to her chest, inhaled, and let it ground her. She wasn't just a weapon. She wasn't just Sergeant Blackwood. Someone still saw her as, someone still believed she was worth more than the missions. It was the smallest lifeline, but enough to steady her. The plane began its descent. Washington spread below, a web of lights flickering like stars. Every one of them represented lives that depended on her choices. Her phone buzzed again. "Professor, this time. Your last paper was brilliant. I should have recognized it for what it was. Stay safe. Teaching is also service." Another from Finn. "Dude, I can't believe I was whining about midterms to someone who's probably saved more lives than our whole class combined. Come back and tell us stories." And Sage Martinez. "My dad says the hardest part isn't the fighting, it's carrying the weight afterward. You're not alone in that." Message after message. Students she barely knew, professors, even dining hall staff, a chorus of voices reaching for her. Her eyes burned. She had expected rejection, hatred, maybe even disgust. Instead, she was being given something she hadn't felt in years. A community. Noticed the tears and tilted his head. "Popular student," he said. She laughed softly, shaking her head. "I thought they'd hate me." "They might have, if you'd lied for selfish reasons, but you were lying to protect them. There's a difference." The engines roared as the wheels touched down. The cabin jolted. Washington waited. The mission waited. Exhaled, gripping her phone. She had said yes to the mission, but deep down she had also said yes to something else. The possibility that when it was over, if she survived, she could be more than just what she had been trained to be. For now, though, she would walk into the fire again. Not because she wanted to, but because 50,000 strangers needed her to. How fast can a normal life disappear? For it took less than a day. By the time the military transport touched down outside Washington, the world had already redrawn her identity. News outlets were plastering her face across every network. Social media spun conspiracy theories. To strangers, she wasn't a 19-year-old freshman anymore. She was a ghost from classified files, dragged into the light. And now the Pentagon waited. The corridors smelled of polished floors and recycled air, a world of authority and consequence where every voice carried orders and every decision carried lives. Walked between Colonel and two security officers, her steps measured, her breath tight. Students had whispered behind her back. Here, the whispers were replaced with nods of respect, but respect felt heavier than suspicion. The briefing room was colder than she expected. Faces she half recognized surrounded the table, analysts who had once processed her reports, tactical officers who had turned her intelligence into missions, generals who had signed off on operations she would never forget. Their eyes carried relief, but also doubt. Could she do it again? Could she survive it again? General Pierce didn't waste time. Her voice was clipped, steady. "The target network has accelerated its timeline. Attacks projected within 36 hours, not 72. Primary cities, Paris, London, Berlin. Morning rush hour. Stomach dropped. 36 hours. No time for detailed planning, no time for rehearsals, no margin for mistakes. The screen at the front of the room lit up with maps, flight routes, circles drawn around subway systems and financial districts. Projected casualties, asked, though part of her didn't want to know. Conservative estimate, 50,000, higher if attacks are synchronized. The number landed like a physical blow. She had asked for a number, but what her mind supplied was faces. Children clutching backpacks, commuters with coffee in hand, families waiting at terminals, faces she would never know but who would vanish if she said no. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Insertion point. Frankfurt, General Pierce said. You'll travel on a diplomatic passport, meet our embedded asset, and attempt to infiltrate through prior connections. Primary objective, gather intelligence and prevent deployment. Secondary, eliminate key personnel if necessary. The words were clinical, precise, stripped of emotion, but knew what they meant. They meant slipping back into the skin she had tried so hard to shed. They meant lies, masks, and choices she would never be able to explain to anyone outside these walls. How long do I have to decide? She asked. The general didn't blink. 4 hours. Transport leaves whether you're on it or not. Looked around the room, every pair of eyes on her, waiting, weighing. She thought of the quad buzzing with ordinary chaos, students rushing to class, smile when she wasn't trying to hide it. She thought of the way it had felt just for a moment to live without blood on her hands. And then she thought of 50,000 strangers, waking up tomorrow, walking into subway tunnels, unaware their survival might depend on whether she said yes. Her voice cracked when she spoke. If I do this, I want guarantees. I want the option to return to civilian life after. I want protection for the people for the friendships I've built. General Pierce's answer came without hesitation. Done. Extraction support, new identity if necessary, full educational funding. And if you don't come back, she paused, the air shifting heavy. Then we'll remember you as a student who died in a car accident, not as what you were. The bluntness hit harder than comfort ever could. Even her death had already been scripted. I need 5 minutes, said, standing abruptly. She stepped into the hallway. The walls buzzed faintly with the hum of power, voices echoing from other rooms. She pulled out her phone and stared at the blank screen before typing. Thank you for reminding me who I wanted to be. I'm going to try very hard to come home and figure out how to be that person. Her thumb hovered before hitting send. She didn't know if would even read it, but sending it was all she had left. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, turned, and walked back into the briefing room. Her voice was steady now. I'm in. The hours blurred. Her textbooks were gone, replaced by tactical dossiers. Her dorm room was traded for the sterile bunks of a military compound. Her sweatshirt gave way to gear she had sworn she'd never wear again. Every change was a reminder. The freshman was gone. The soldier was back. On the transport flight toward Europe, sat rigid in her seat, headphones pressed to her ears, listening to intercepted communications. Voices she recognized. Voices she had once answered with lies and promises, now threaded through static, plotting something unspeakable. Colonel studied her across the narrow cabin, his expression unreadable. After an hour of silence, he spoke. You don't have to prove anything. Not to me, not to anyone. Her gaze stayed on the transcript glowing in her lap. 50,000 people say otherwise. His voice softened. Don't carry this like penance. Soldiers who treat missions like punishment don't come back whole. She wanted to argue, but deep down she knew he was right. She wasn't doing this for medals. She wasn't even doing it for duty. She was doing it because she couldn't live with herself if she didn't. Her phone buzzed again, secure line encrypted. She expected another intelligence update. Instead, a name flashed across the screen. Her breath caught. She hesitated, then opened it. Whatever happens, remember, you still have a home here. Maybe not the same as before, but real. Come back. His throat tightened. She turned her face away from the others, pressing the phone to her chest. She had thought she'd lost everything and yet, somehow, there was still a thread connecting her back. And in the silence of the aircraft, she realized something she hadn't dared believe. She wasn't fighting just to stop 50,000 deaths. She was fighting to protect the fragile piece of life she had found. Washington disappeared behind them, the Atlantic stretching endless below. Ahead, Europe waited, dark, urgent, and alive with threats. Stared out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She didn't look like a student anymore. She didn't look like a soldier either. She looked like someone standing on the razor's edge between two worlds, knowing she might not survive the crossing. For the first time since the helicopters landed on her campus, she allowed herself to whisper the truth aloud. "I'm afraid." The engines roared, drowning her words, but the truth was out now, and in admitting it she felt something unexpected. Not weakness, not shame, but resolve. Because courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was carrying fear into the fire and walking forward anyway. And that was exactly what she was about to do. What happens when the past you ran from is waiting for you on the other side of the ocean? Frankfurt's air was colder than she remembered, not just in temperature but in weight. The airport buzzed with normal life, families dragging suitcases, businessmen checking watches, children tugging on parents' sleeves. But to every face was a shadow, every gesture a code, every step a potential tale. Once you'd lived undercover, you never looked at crowds the same way again. She walked through the terminal with her diplomatic passport clutched like a prop in a play, her hair tied back, her clothes deliberately plain. Just another traveler moving through checkpoints. And yet her pulse betrayed her. It thudded with every glance from uniformed guards, every casual question at passport control. She answered smoothly, fluently, without hesitation. But underneath she was counting seconds, counting exits, counting breaths. Colonel had stayed behind in Washington to coordinate from the command center. In the terminal was Sergeant Blackwood anymore. She wasn't even the freshman from. She was alone. At baggage claim, a woman in a navy coat stood with a folded newspaper tucked under one arm, a red thread tied around her wrist, the signal, their asset. "Call me," she said, her accent faint but sharp. Her eyes never lingered too long on his face, scanning the crowd with the restless precision of someone who had lived too long in shadows. Nodded once, "Call me nobody." Almost smiled. "Good, you still remember the rules." They left the terminal without another word, slipping into the stream of commuters. A gray sedan waited at the curb. Inside, dossiers were already waiting. Photos, routes, meeting points. Flipped through them, her chest tightening. Names she knew, voices she could still hear. Men who had once trusted her, men who would kill her on sight if they knew the truth. Drove, her hands steady on the wheel. The network has splintered since your time inside. Rebuilt it, smarter, more disciplined. He believes you're dead. If he learns otherwise, she didn't finish. She didn't need to. Closed the file, her fingers trembling. Then I don't get a second chance. Their first stop was on the outskirts of the city. Sparse, functional, the kind of place where walls were just thin enough to hear your own breathing. Sat on the edge of a metal cot, her duffel bag at her feet, staring at the weapons laid out on the table. A sniper rifle, a sidearm, knives, tools she hadn't touched since Germany. Her hands hovered over them, hesitant. Picking one up felt like letting go of the person she had tried to be. But the mission clock was ticking. 34 hours left. She reached for the sidearm first, its weight both foreign and familiar. Muscle memory snapped awake as she slid the magazine in place, chambered around, tested the sight. The sound of the slide snapping forward echoed in the room like a door slamming shut. Watch from the doorway. You've done this before. Didn't look up too many times. Her hands paused. She thought of text, "You still have a home here." For a moment the weapon felt heavier than steel, heavier than guilt. But she holstered it anyway. Night fell. The city lights glowed against the dark, painting glass and steel in fractured brilliance. Moved through the crowd at the Frankfurt Central Station, her hood up, her steps measured. Trailed behind at a distance, eyes scanning for tails. The intel said people would meet here. She didn't need confirmation. She felt it. The way the air shifted. The way certain figures loitered just long enough to seem casual but not casual enough to blend. And then she saw him. Not another ghost. He had been her handler once when she was undercover. He had taught her their signals, their codes, their routines. She had laughed at his jokes, pretended to trust him, even as she sent reports that sealed his comrades' fates. Now he stood across the platform, scanning faces. His beard was longer, his eyes colder, but it was him. His chest tightened. If he saw her, really saw her, everything would unravel. The train thundered into the station. Crowds surged. She slipped into the tide, moving closer, her hood shielding her face. The mission required contact. She had to know what knew. But every step closer felt like walking back into the fire she had fled. He turned. His eyes brushed past her. For a heartbeat, she thought it was over. Then his gaze moved on. She exhaled, forcing her pulse to slow. His voice crackled softly in her earpiece. "You okay?" "No," whispered, "but I'm still moving." She boarded the train. So did. The ride stretched in silence, punctuated by the rattle of wheels on track. Sat 2 rows behind him, her reflection faint in the window, her hands clenched in her lap. Leaned forward, murmuring into his phone in Arabic. She strained to catch words, fragments. Paris. Dawn. Deployment. Her stomach knotted. It was worse than they thought. She rose as the train slowed at the next station. She had to risk it. She had to follow. The doors hissed open, stepped off, followed, her hood still low. The platform was nearly empty. Shadows swallowed the edges. And then he stopped. Turned. Their eyes met. Recognition flared. The name wasn't whispered, it was a knife. Her blood froze. In that single word, the illusion shattered. His hand went to his coat. Her training took over. She closed the distance in 2 strides, her grip locking his wrist before the weapon cleared fabric. A struggle, a flash of metal, the crack of bone against concrete. His weapon clattered to the ground. "Don't," she hissed, voice low, fierce. His eyes burned with fury and something deeper, betrayal. "They said you were dead," he spat. "You were supposed to be dead." "I was," she said, "but death didn't take." He laughed, bitter, broken. "You lied to us, you lied to me." She tightened her grip. "And if I hadn't, how many children would be buried now? How many innocents would you have slaughtered?" For a moment silence stretched. Then his lips curled. "You think you can stop, he's already ahead of you. Tomorrow Paris will choke, and you will watch it burn." His chest heaved. The words cut sharper than his blade. And then headlights flared. Vehicles screeched to a halt at the platform edge. Armed men poured out, shadows armed with rifles. Grinned through the blood on his lips. "You should have stayed dead." Her instincts screamed. No time for hesitation, no time for thought. She pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the night. Fell. And the chase began. How far can you run when the enemy already knows your face? The gunshot still rang in his ears as his body crumpled against the platform tiles. For a heartbeat, the world went silent. Then headlights flared, doors slammed, and the night erupted. Armed men spilled from black vans, rifles raised, their shouts cutting through the station. Instinct screamed. She grabbed his dropped weapon, vaulted over the bench, and sprinted toward the stairwell. Bullets ricocheted off steel beams, sparks chasing her heels. The civilians on the platform shrieked, scattering, their cries blending with the metallic roar of gunfire. His voice crackled in her earpiece. "Extraction route, north exit parking structure, move. She didn't answer. Her lungs were already burning. Her feet pounded against concrete as she flew up the stairs two at a time. The station above was chaos. Commuters froze, caught between confusion and terror. Shoved through them, every second a gamble between cover and exposure. The glass doors burst open to the street. Cold night air hit her lungs, sharp and punishing. Across the road, sedan screeched to a halt, the passenger door flung wide. Sprinted. The poured out behind her, their shadows long in the streetlights. One raised a rifle. She dove, rolling across the asphalt as the burst shredded the space she had occupied a second earlier. Horns blared, brakes screamed, cars swerving as the firefight spilled into traffic. She lunged into the sedan, slammed the door, tires shrieking as the car fishtailed away from the curb. Bullets shattered the rear window, glass raining into the backseat. Ducked low, heart pounding, weapon still clenched in her shaking hand. "That was sloppy," snapped, knuckles white on the wheel. "You weren't supposed to engage tonight." His voice broke between ragged breaths. "He recognized me. I didn't have a choice." Swore under her breath, weaving through traffic at impossible speed. "Now they know. Every ghost you left behind just woke up." Pressed her head back against the seat, her pulse thundering. She saw his face again, the betrayal in his eyes. He hadn't been just another operative. He had been a man who once trusted her, who once believed her lies. And now his blood was on her hands. Again. They reached the at midnight. The sedan's engine ticked as it cooled, the city's noise muffled by thick walls. Stripped off her jacket, packing the small room with restless energy, every nerve on fire. Dropped the keys on the table. "We've lost the element of surprise. People will already know you're alive. Tomorrow will be harder." His hands trembled as she reloaded her weapon. "Tomorrow." Paris said simply, "That's where they'll strike first. That's where we go." Stopped packing, her breath sharp. Paris. She could already see it. The crowded metro stations, the rush of morning commuters, the exact kind of target would choose. "How many hours?" she asked. 22, replied. The number pressed down like a weight. Less than a day to stop a catastrophe. Lowered herself onto the cot, her hands covering her face. "I thought I left this behind." Leaned against the wall, studying her. "You don't leave things like this behind. You carry them. The question is whether you let them bury you or whether you use them." Let the words hang in the silence. She thought of his message. "You still have a home here." She thought of his unexpected note. Teaching is also service. She thought of the classmates who had sent her fragments of encouragement, people she had once believed would turn away. And then she thought of the crowd at the train station tonight, their screams, their terror, the panic she had helped unleash. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "How many more people have to scream before this ends?" Didn't answer. Some questions had no answers. Sleep never came. Lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the building setting her nerves on edge. By dawn, she was already dressed, her hair tied back, her weapons checked and rechecked. Slid a dossier across the table. Inside, his latest confirmed photo, a grainy shot from a surveillance drone. His beard trimmed, his eyes harder, sharper, as if time had honed him instead of aging him. "He'll be in Paris by noon," said, "coordinating deployment." His fingers tightened on the photo. "Then so will I." The train to Paris cut through the countryside, its windows reflecting endless stretches of fields and villages, all of them still asleep in the pale morning light. Passengers dozed or sipped coffee, unaware of the storm gathering around them. Sat in the corner, hood up, her phone in her hands. She opened her messages. "Please don't shut me out, even if you can't tell me everything." She stared at the words, her throat tight. She typed slowly, "I'm trying to come back, that's all I can promise." Her finger hovered before hitting send. And then she locked the screen. She couldn't afford the distraction, not now. But for the first time in days, A flicker of hope pushed against the dread. She wasn't completely alone. By midday they reached the city. Paris unfolded like a dream edged with dread, the Seine glinting in the pale light, dames' towers casting shadows, streets alive with chatter and movement. But beneath the beauty saw it differently. Crowds, choke points, escape routes, targets. She wasn't a tourist. She was a soldier walking through the bones of a future massacre. Led her through narrow streets, their pace brisk but unhurried, until they reached another tucked above a bakery. The smell of fresh bread floated up the stairwell, painfully ordinary against the files waiting upstairs. Maps of the Paris metro were spread across the table. Red circles marked stations, morning rush hour, lines that crossed like veins waiting to be poisoned. "Which one?" asked, scanning the maps. Bastille Nord listed. High capacity, maximum impact, but intel isn't clear, may deploy multiple units. Leaned over the map, her eyes scanning. She could see patterns in ways analysts couldn't. The rhythm of how the network moved, how they layered decoys, how they manipulated chaos. She tapped the map, too central to ignore, they'll want the shock value. His gaze flicked up. "Are you sure?" His jaw tightened. "I'm never sure, but I know he'll want it to hurt." As night fell over Paris, stood by the window, looking down at the street below. Couples strolled hand in hand. Tourists snapped photos. Children laughed as they tugged their parents toward the glowing lights of the carousel. She pressed her forehead to the glass, her breath fogging the pain. For a moment, she wished she could be anyone else. A tourist, a passerby, a girl with nothing more urgent than what pastry to buy in the morning. But she was. Her phone buzzed, another message. "If you're scared, it means you still care. Don't lose that." His hands trembled. She closed her eyes, holding the phone to her chest. Fear, care, hope. They all tangled together until she didn't know where one ended and the other began. She whispered into the dark, as if could hear her across the ocean. "I'm scared, but I'm still moving." The city lights glimmered, unaware of the storm about to break. And knew tomorrow would demand everything she had left. What does it feel like to know an entire city is breathing borrowed air? Could feel it in Paris that morning. The hum of the metro system alive with thousands of footsteps, the rising pulse of rush hour as trains groaned through tunnels, each packed with faces that didn't know how close death already lingered. She moved through it like a shadow, a hood pulled low, her pace steady but her eyes restless. Every passenger was a calculation, every corridor a potential trap. His voice whispered in her earpiece. 3 confirmed operatives moving toward station, 2 more at Bastille. We can't cover both. Which do we prioritize? His chest tightened. 2 stations, 2 bombs, 1 choice. She closed her eyes briefly, centering herself in the chaos. Would never split his forces evenly. He thrived on distraction, on making defenders chase decoys. She pictured the maps again, the veins of tunnels, the points of maximum terror. She whispered, "That's the heart, that's where we'll be." Her boots struck the tiled stairs 2 at a time as she descended into the station. The air grew thick, humid, alive with the crush of bodies. Announcements echoed overhead in French and English, the cheerful tone grating against the dread curling in her gut. Through the crowd she saw them. 3 men moving together, their steps too precise to be casual. Their bags heavy, carried with the careful ease of people who knew exactly what was inside. Explosives. His breath hitched. Civilians pressed around her, unaware. Children laughing, commuters sipping coffee, earbuds sealing them off from the danger at their elbows. She moved closer. Every instinct screamed not to draw attention, not to spook them. If they triggered early, hundreds would die instantly. She whispered, "I need confirmation on." Silence for a beat, then, "He's here, upper concourse, east wing." Her chest tightened. The man who should have been dead, the one who had shattered her before. She had to make a choice, stop the bomb carriers or confront himself. Her pulse thundered. If she stopped the men, the leader would escape. If she went for the bombs would detonate. Unless she could thread the impossible line between. The first carrier dropped his bag by the stairs. Too casual, too precise. Pushed through the crowd, bumping a businessman hard enough to send his briefcase tumbling. Papers scattered, chaos rippled, the carrier glanced up, just enough. She slammed into him, one hand pinning his wrist, the other yanking the bag away. His eyes widened, recognition flashing. Her. "Move," barked in French, shoving civilians back. The carrier lunged. She drove her knee into his chest, the impact reverberating through her bones. The bag slid across the tiles. A woman screamed. The crowd erupted, panic spreading like fire. Two more operatives surged forward, rifles hidden under coats now snapping into view. Bullets cracked against the ceiling. Civilians shrieked, diving for cover. The tiled station became a cage of echoes and terror. Dove behind a pillar, returning fire, her hands steady even as her lungs heaved. One operative went down, his weapon clattering. The other ducked into the crowd, vanishing into the stampede. His voice in her ear, moving East Concourse. His chest burned. Too many threads, too little time. She shoved the disabled bag toward a fleeing officer, shouting in French, "Bomb squad, secure it." Then she sprinted, weaving through the chaos toward the east wing. The upper concourse was thinner, quieter, the stampede still rushing below. And there, standing at the balcony rail, watching the chaos unfold with cold amusement, was. Her breath caught. He was taller than she remembered, leaner, his beard trimmed, but the eyes were the same. Eyes that didn't just see. They pierced. They remembered. And they recognized her. His voice was smooth, mocking. "The dead girl walks again." Her weapon leveled on him, but her hand trembled, not from fear, from the weight of the past. The last time she had seen those eyes, she had been bleeding out on a cold floor, certain she wouldn't wake again. "You should have stayed buried," he said softly. "Now you'll watch Paris burn." He signaled with his hand. Another man stepped from the shadows, a detonator in his grip. His chest seized. If his thumb pressed down, the station below would turn into a tomb. "Stop," she shouted, her voice raw, breaking. "There are children down there, families, don't do this." Tilted his head, almost curious. "You think I care about their lives? Their deaths are the message." Her finger tightened on the trigger, every nerve screamed to act. But one wrong move, one twitch, could mean hundreds dead. Her voice trembled, but she forced it steady. "You won't win. You'll only be remembered as a butcher, and butchers are always hunted down." His lips curved in a smile. "Perhaps, but so are traitors." The detonator's handler shifted, ready. His heart pounded. This was the razor's edge. She thought of words. "If you're scared, it means you still care." She thought of warning. "Don't carry this like penance." She thought of every message from every flicker of belief that she was more than just a weapon. Her decision came in a breath. A shot cracked. The detonator handler fell. Smoke curled from his barrel. Smile vanished. Fury replaced it. He lunged for the fallen device but was already moving. The crowd's roar rose again below, chaos exploding as she and collided, weapons clattering across the tiles. They fought with raw desperation, years of unfinished hatred behind every strike. His grip was iron, hers fueled by something deeper than survival, something like redemption. "You betrayed us," he spat, forcing her toward the edge. "You betrayed yourself," she gasped, shoving back. "You chose blood over life." The detonator skidded across the floor. Both lunged. Her hand closed on it first. For a split second their eyes locked. His rage, her fear, their history tangled and jagged. And then she crushed it beneath her boot. Plastic cracked, circuits snapped. The device died. A howl tore from his throat. He drew a blade, slashing wild. Pain seared across her arm, hot and blinding. She staggered but didn't fall. Her sidearm was still within reach. She dove, fingers brushing steel, lifting, aiming. Another shot split the air. Stumbled, shock flashing in his eyes. He looked down at his chest, the bloom of red spreading across his shirt. Froze, she hadn't fired. On the balcony above, lowered her rifle, smoke curling from the barrel. Knees buckled. He collapsed, his blade clattering from his grip. His eyes found one last time, burning with a mix of fury and something almost like respect. Then the light left them. The station thundered with footsteps, sirens, shouts. Security forces swarmed. Civilians wept. Stood trembling, her bloodied arm pressed tight, her chest heaving. The detonator lay in ruins at her feet. His body lay still. Paris was alive. But inside, she felt something break all over again. What does it feel like to save a city, but lose another piece of yourself in the process? Couldn't answer right away. Not when her ears were still ringing from gunfire, not when her arm throbbed where its blade had cut deep, not when the cries of panicked civilians echoed through the tunnels of station like ghosts refusing to leave. Paris was alive, the bombs had been stopped, the detonator lay shattered, was dead. But inside, silence grew. She sat in the back of an ambulance, her wound bound hastily, sirens wailing outside. French officers swarmed the scene, reporters pressed at barricades, the whole city already spinning the story. But none of them would know the truth, not the full truth. She wasn't here to be thanked. She wasn't here to be seen. She was here because she couldn't walk away. Leaned against the doorway of the ambulance, her expression unreadable. "You did it," she said softly. Looked at her eyes hollow. "We did it." Hesitated, then added, "This network will fracture without him, but it won't end, you know that." Nodded faintly. "It never ends, not really." The ambulance door shut. The engine growled. They moved, but's mind didn't. It stayed behind in that station on those tiles where she had once again pulled the trigger and watched a life end. And she wondered, how many times could a person survive that? 3 days later, the official story broke. French security forces thwart major terror attack in Paris. Suspected leader killed in raid. Dozens of lives saved. The news anchors spoke with polished relief. The headlines painted the operation as a success, and the public sighed and moved on. Sat in a miles away, wrapped in silence. She watched the broadcast without sound, her reflection faint in the television screen. The announcer spoke of courage, of swift action, of victory. But they never spoke her name. And that was exactly how it had to be. Back in Washington, General Pierce offered what had been promised. Educational funding secured, is still yours if you want it. Your name stays buried. To the world, you were never there. Stood in the office, her arm in a sling, her body still carrying bruises. She didn't answer immediately. Her eyes drifted to the window where the city pulsed with normal life. "Do I want it?" she whispered almost to herself. "Or do I deserve it?" Pierce's gaze softened just slightly. Sometimes those are the same thing. But didn't believe that, not yet. The return to campus felt unreal. It was spring. The quad bloomed with life, students sprawled on the grass, laughter threading the air. Walked through it like a ghost, her bag slung over her shoulder, her sweatshirt pulled tight. Some faces turned toward her. A few whispered, but most didn't look twice. And that was the gift she had been given, anonymity. She slipped back into dorm life quietly. No parades, no ceremonies, just the sound of a door clicking shut behind her, the familiar clutter of books on a desk, the hum of ordinary life waiting to be picked up again. Found her first. She was sitting on the steps outside the library, watching the sunset streak gold across the campus when he appeared. He didn't say her name. He didn't press her for answers. He just sat beside her, silent. After a while he asked, "Did you come back for good this time?" His throat tightened. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to believe it, but honesty tugged at her. "I came back," she whispered, For now, and I'll hold onto that as long as I can. Nodded slowly, accepting what little she could give. And then in the quiet that followed felt something she hadn't expected. Not peace, not yet, but the faint beginning of it. Weeks passed. The world spun on. Students worried about exams. Professors lectured about history, mathematics, art. Slipped into the rhythm her days a fragile blend of classes, reading, late-night coffee runs. But inside the shadows remained. Nights were still restless. Memories still cut deep. She carried the faces she couldn't forget, the ones she had lost, the ones she had saved, the ones she had destroyed. Sometimes she wondered if she was pretending to be a student, pretending to be normal, pretending she hadn't walked through fire and carried it home with her. And yet there were moments, small ones. A laugh shared within the dining hall, a professor's smile when she turned in an essay, a child on the quad handing her a flower for no reason at all. Moments that reminded her why she had fought. Moments that reminded her she was still alive. One night as the campus lay quiet under stars, sat by the fountain, her notebook open, pen in hand. She wrote slowly, the words uneven but they came. I don't know if I'll ever be whole again. I don't know if peace is something I get to keep. But I know this. Life is not measured by the battles we fight, but by the moments we dare to live afterward. She closed the notebook, her eyes lifting to the sky. The air was cool. The night was still. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to breathe without feeling like the world was about to collapse. Because survival wasn't just about breathing. It was about finding meaning in the breaths that followed. Because courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was carrying fear quietly, refusing to let it decide the ending. Because sacrifice wasn't loud. It was often invisible, hidden in the faces of those who would never know your name. And because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.